Okay, so what we're going to be looking at is other indicators on how our government feels we are doing in our economy. And so GDP, again, there's some keywords when you get this. They're looking at the final good and service produced within the boundaries of the United States within a year. So when I'm looking at GDP, what are the three indicators that I need to look at? Final. In the US and in a year. Okay, those are the three indicators. Whenever I'm looking at GDP, I'm looking at final, I'm looking at within the borders, and I'm looking in within the US. So Harley Davidson used to be all made in the United States, but once those tariffs were put on them, they actually started European production. Am I going to count their European production in GDP? No, that's going to be another indicator called GNP. Okay, so we're going to see GDP combines our four sectors of the economy. C is the consumers. This is what we spend. I is investment in business. That's what they do. Remember how we talked about this in Pimer and Timer that we call it Y because I will always be for business. G is for government, and then net exports is exports minus imports, which will eventually take us down the road into foreign policy because what do you think the U.S. has? Do we export more or import more? We import, so we have a negative trade, we have a deficit. And this is why Trump keeps on wanting to put stuff on China because they export more. And a lot of that has to deal with their currency, right? And so we actually have a negative trade because we take in more from other countries because according to comparative advantage, do they make it cheaper? Yes, and so we shouldn't waste our time doing that, and that's why we import. So we're going to look at things that are not included in GDP, intermediate goods. Those are things that become part of a final good. So let's just say I had a bakery, okay? Would I count the eggs that I bought for that bakery? The flour, what else would I put in my cake? Sugar, I wouldn't count that. But when I sell that cake, do I count that as GDP? Yes, so GDP really doesn't count because we talked about this being double counting. We can't double count because that will inflate our GDP. So again, Ford buys tires to produce in a car that it's going to sell. Do we count the tires? No. We're also going to see that Ford buys a new assembly line. Is that a final product for them?
Yes.
So we count that assembly line. So in my bakery, if I were to buy a stove, is that a final product for me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so transfer payments, we talked about this last time. It's when the government pays a group of individuals and it pays them, but are they giving a good or service in return? No, and I said they don't tap dance, they don't do any of that. So we're going to see that things like food stamps, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, unemployment benefits, dependent to aid to dependent survivors. Have y'all ever heard of that? People who are in the military, a lot of their children get aid from the government because they're dependent survivors. Mm-hmm. So it's anytime that the government is giving a payment to a group of people to help their life, that is not counted. So government pays unemployment, that is not counted because they did not give anything. However, the government buys a new computer payroll system, that is counted. The government's paying in their employees, like, I don't know, an ICE agent, that's getting counted. So there's a difference between GDP and GNP. GDP includes all production of goods within the U.S., so it's also going to count foreign. This would count like Toyota, because y'all know Toyota is in Texas, right? It counts all of their production because Toyota moved to Texas. Toyota moved to the United States because in the 70s, we started putting tariffs on their goods, right? And then all of a sudden, people weren't buying their cars. So they realized that if they come within, that the tariff will be applied. So a lot of foreign cars are produced within the U.S. to get around the tariff. But that would count towards our GDP. However, there's GNP. And this is the production of all U.S. businesses abroad. So y'all know like McDonald's is everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So we would count all of that. Ford is everywhere as well. We will count that as well. Do y'all know like Disney is everywhere? So we count their stuff overseas. So GNP is really GDP minus the foreign production plus the U.S. production overseas. Okay, so examples, I already talked about Toyota. It counts towards GDP, but is not counted towards GNP. And then Ford production in Europe, not counted in US GDP, and then counted in GNP. So there's other measures of how to measure our wealth beyond GDP. One of them is the GDP through the income approach. Add up everybody's income. But does everybody always get an income? No, there's some people who do illegal activities, right? And I think this is where we were veering in our conversation last time. Like, this is why the government, if they legalize drugs, would they be able to count that towards this? Yes, but right now it's not counting towards that. Like, people who are babysitters, that is an illegal activity because they're not telling their income. And actually, y'all know you don't have to report your income if it's below $500. Yeah, if anything above that. So like I do reviews for like AP, like I go to Rockwell and they're like, how much do you want to be paid? I was like, $500. And they're like, okay, we'll pay you $500 because that's really cheap. But now do I have to report it? No.
So it isn't taxed.
So it isn't taxed. So then they said, okay, well, you want to be $500? I was like, yes, but I want to give you my receipt for mileage separate. So then, because if they were to lump it in one check, would it be over 500? So now I have two, so I'm not taxed on it.
So if you get paid, you're saying if whatever you're doing gets you paid 500 or less at a time?
Yes,
Or,
at a time, because Rockwell will cut me a check.
so they'll
and
give
that
you a
check-
check for $500.
But then they have to report, but because it's less than 500, am I gonna get dinged on my taxes? No.
So essentially, making this up, obviously this isn't happening, but you could say, I wanna get paid $5,000, but you need in $500 checks is what you're saying you could,
But how many times are you reporting? Mine was only a one-time business transaction. That's when you get in trouble, because my father-in-law is a welder, and he works with several businesses. And so he realizes he has to keep his income below a certain threshold for taxes. And so sometimes he would say, I will pay, if you pay me in cash, I will charge you less.
right,
So then that's like this thing, it's not getting reported to our national income. So our national income is actually deflated because is the government accounting for everything? No. Okay, they're not counting for the illegal babysitters, the people who mow lawns, right? I don't know what other illegal activity.
Lemonade
Drugs,
stands.
lemonade stands, hey.
Isn't that weird, the 9-year-old selling lemonade?
Yeah, and Greg Abbott came around and made that like a law this summer. Lastly, personal income, earned and unearned, such as Social Security, we're not counting. And also we're not counting things that household. Like I go to my house and I have to clean it, right? Am I paying for someone to do that? So that's something that you don't. Are you okay? I thought you were like doing my husband, like laughing that I clean my house. Now you.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, I don't know the Heimlich, so.
It's a little kernel stuck in my
Oh,
throat.
oh.
That's the thing where you guys, because otherwise you.
Yeah. Actually, my big sister once, when I was like 7 or 5, somewhere between that, I jumped on my dad's bed and I heard a line from my mouth, and I choked. And my big sister had to give me the Heimlich.
Saved your life.
And then the day before, the first day in 7th grade, it was a really bad day because I saw a rat running to Taco Casa. And then I choked on my soft taco. This was at dinner. I wasn't even at Taco Casa. But I choked on a piece of chicken.
Who saved your life then?
The
Chicken.
same one.
Wait.
Chicken. They don't
Chicken
sell
Taco Casa?
Taco Casa, they never sell chicken.
I know,
at
I've
all.
never been to Taco Casa. I was on my way back from church and we drove by Taco Casa and I saw a rat run into it. And then later at dinner.
Okay. Sorry,
Oh.
we dovetailed PowerPoint people. I,
Only 6 months to run.
lastly, so one of the things on GDP, it never takes into account what you do for work. But if I were to pay someone to clean my house, would that count towards GDP?
Yep.
Yes. So the work that your family does where they're not paid doesn't take into account for GDP. Disposable income, this is used, many of y'all were like, you calculate y'all work, right? And you're like, oh, I make this much an hour. But really it's after what is taken out in taxes, that is your disposable income. And so sometimes our stuff is reported in our gross income, which is total. Okay, and we're done with that.
I'd like to get paid in gross income.
All right, we're gonna do one